Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Intel 471 webinar, Crashing the Party, How to Leverage CTI to Mitigate Supply Chain Risk. Just before we begin, just a friendly reminder, you can submit your questions during the presentation in the chat box, and we'll look to cover those at the end of the webinar. And also that these slides and this recording are going to be made available following the webinar. All right, thanks again for joining, and let's go ahead and dive right in. Just really quickly about myself, my name is Peter Marzalik. I'm a member of our solutions engineering team here at Intel 471. My main role here is to work pretty closely with large CTI teams across the Americas, Canada, and really help those teams understand how to leverage our intel and our data to help meet their needs. Today's topic in particular is pretty near and dear to my heart. When I first got my start in the industry about a decade ago now, started in a more traditional kind of supply chain intel role, and certainly recall at that time was doing a lot of tracking of slash and grab cargo theft or local corruption with port operators to be able to sneak drugs into shipments and things like that. But definitely we're starting to see even at that time how cyber was going to go and kind of play a bigger role in complicating supply chain security. And so, just suffice it to say, a pleasure to be here to be able to dig into this topic with you all. Just to start, we'll do a quick intro of, who is Intel 471, a quick kind of setting of the scene, and then we can go ahead and transition into a bit of a higher level discussion on, some of the different risk trends we've seen around supply chain security and, key kind of attack vectors that we've seen, targeting supply chain as well. And then we'll really, dive deep then into, how you can look to use CTI for, a kind of a more proactive stance, more kind of early warning type indicators. Then we can finish up here flagging some of the notable developments that we saw last year, and then, a bit of an outlook overview of what we're seeing going into 2024. Great. So really just quickly about Intel 471. Company was founded in 2014 by Mark Arena, Jason Passwaters, and a small team of folks who had decades of experience across law enforcement, intel, and as well as the military. And I'd say kind of the key thing, when Intel 471 came on the scene was really kind of seeing a gap in the market around being able to collect at scale within what we call the cyber underground. So those really kind of closed and vetted sources that you really do need, human operators with the kind of the cultural linguistic skill set to be able to get access to. Created a platform called Titan out of that to be able to provide kind of a structured way for our customers to, comb through both the automated data we were collecting as well as the human analytical reporting that they're putting out. And so today, a decade later, we're at over 200 employees, and we really do preach what we call a boots on the ground model. And so have folks based around the world with that cultural and that linguistic expertise to get very kind of privileged access to these more closed sources within the cyber underground. And from there, we've really then been able to build out kind of the different solution modules that you see laid out here. And so kind of the focus on tracking the adversary and various TTPs, looking to see where vulnerabilities are being discussed and weaponized, broader compromised credential monitoring, broader kind of marketplace, card shop type collection. And then finally, our own kind of in-house built system for emulation for malware intelligence. And we'll say that's really allowed us to, be able to, support teams across the private and public sector. And certainly a big, piece of that for, a number of the industries, even shown here on this slide, is also, around being able to secure the supply chain. So figured it'd be useful to have this slide here as well as part of today's conversation, since we're, really looking at how you can be, more proactive in using threat intelligence to help mitigate, various supply chain risks. This graphic here shows a pretty common pattern that we see for organizations in terms of how they go from being a bit more reactive and in terms of working to protect their own attack surface, and then looking to become more proactive and being able to integrate threat intelligence into the programs. So again, just really quickly here, naturally, a lot of organizations now, do have a, kind of firm understanding and kind of monitoring around their, specific attack surface, their various digital assets. And, I think the kind of the concern that you start to face with just taking that approach is really just kind of reacting to, plugging kind of the holes, patching whatever vulnerabilities are kind of popping up related to you, and not tracking, anywhere kind of beyond that surface area. Typically where we see kind of organizations pivot next then is starting to look at, similar companies, to them, to try and get a little bit of a better understanding of what threats might be coming their way. So that's certainly where, some of the broader like ISACs come into play, or different kind of trust groups and so forth, where we really kind of, live and focus our, kind of intel collection analysis is then outside of the perimeter. And so we do that both from a, kind of technical perspective. And so a lot of organizations, when they kind of make that pivot, start to track IOCs, start to get, different types of, tools, SIMs, et cetera, to be able to, kind of block, whatever type of kind of malware or other types of campaigns coming in their environment. And so often see that as kind of the next step. And then really where we kind of see, sort of the kind of the pinnacle of proactivity when it comes to, leveraging threat intelligence to, help protect your organization, is then really getting into more of the kind of actor communications, direct kind of adversary engagement type work to get, more visibility into what might be coming your way. And so, certainly we'll discuss here and around kind of supply chain security and the risks that exist there. Some of the additional difficulties that come with, even with that kind of second tier of, just kind of, understanding your attack surface or those around you, since supply chains have become, so interconnected, so complex, even taking kind of an inventory of that can be very, very tricky in and of itself. But yeah, so we'll definitely be digging into some of the more kind of proactive steps you can leverage for that supply chain security piece. I'd say the last thing, just from kind of a, setting the scene perspective, is, what we really feel here at Intel Plus Server One is another kind of important piece to the puzzle of developing a more kind of proactive stance, whether it comes to supply chain security or other kind of, threat area domains you're looking to address. So that is a, kind of requirements driven type approach. So we do have our own taxonomy that we have built called the General Intelligence Requirements Framework. And it's really, our kind of team's mapping of all the different types of threats, actors that we see within the cyber underground. We did make that open source available last year. So encourage you, if you have not come across the GIR handbook, to take a peek at that GitHub repository, which details all the various Intel requirements there. And I'd say really when it comes to, kind of supply chain security and, starting to understand what your risk profile is, the process of developing these types of intelligence requirements for your organization can be particularly helpful and revealing. A big part of that process is looking to engage with different stakeholders, understanding what needs they may have to put into your collection plan. And so that kind of initial sort of step in looking to speak with kind of a very broad sort of audience in your organization, particularly related to kind of supply chain management, can often be really, really revealing and helpful as you're looking to build out your requirements. And you'll see here a little bit later in the webinar, we'll certainly talk about some of the GIRs that are often leveraged by our customers, specific to supply chain related risks. But yeah, something to keep in mind. We'll kind of return to that through our conversation today. Great. Well, with that kind of quick introduction, I want to go ahead and start to dive into the meat of the presentation. And so first, I want to start at a bit more of a high level in terms of kind of what we see are some of the key trends and also some of the notable attack vectors that we've observed, over the years as supply chain risks have continued to kind of proliferate and become that much more kind of a focus for a lot of organizations. So I'd say the first two kind of go without saying. Our modern economy, in these times is truly defined by both kind of very complex interconnectivity as well as globalization. And a big part of for really any organization is sort of an increased dependence on vendors, on third parties, on suppliers, on supply chains. And so that in itself has, really complicated, what it even means to understand and inventory your attack surface, but then, of course, also then set up monitoring across your entire, digital estate as well. And so I think certainly threat actors have taken notice, right? And I think some kind of a big thing that actors have realized is how much of a force multiplier an attack within a supply chain of organization, or within a software or a product can be to, whether it be from a, kind of monetization, financial motivation perspective, or from an espionage perspective, the ability to, and conduct and get, additional visibility into a lot of organizations through the supply chain. So these are just a few of the kind of top vectors that we've been, observing kind of forming and accelerating over time. We'll dig into each one of these in a bit, and kind of how some of the different CTI solutions can apply to those. But we'll say, kind of right off the bat, not surprisingly, credential theft being one of the biggest kind of attack vectors. And so again, just actors constantly hunting and searching for compromised credentials out there. Seeing if, it can be just a shot in the dark, could get lucky in terms of, being able to log into a certain kind of privileged account that maybe doesn't have 2FA on it. And that can be sort of the simple, very straightforward kind of initial access that they might be able to get to then escalate privileges and move through, move a supply chain through an organization. Certainly other ones, a little more, kind of complex type threats that we'll dig into as well, and show how some of the different CTI solutions can apply to those. I'll say then the other thing just to kind of keep in mind, supply chain incursions, at least from our kind of research and analysis over the years, certainly not a new thing. So, we can go all the way back to 2013 and the Target data breach, and the fact that that was something that initially started with, compromised supplier credentials that came in through a spear phishing campaign, and specifically targeted leverage to one of Target's HVAC, suppliers. So again, this is something that actors have, consistently been looking to figure out how to best target the supply chain and, monetize that type of access. I think what we've really, seen, and I think a lot of folks would agree to, particularly within the last few years, is an acceleration of, different types of tactics, that much more kind of threat actor focus and interest in looking to target supply chains in different ways. And so, certainly SolarWinds and Log4j in 2020 and in 2022 being, two of the big ones, but then, looking at last year and what Clop did with Go Anywhere and Move It, being some of the more recent kind of notable incursions as well. Great. Well, let's go ahead and dive into then, how we really see CTI can play an important role in helping mitigate, some of these common supply chain threats. And so really would love to kind of, dig into each one of these and, explain, sort of the threat that we do see out there related to the supply chain, and then, where, potential solutions can come into play, especially for kind of early warning, type indicators. So again, had spoke a little about credential theft. I think we see a lot of actors out there who do, have very kind of advanced methods to comb through various types of data, data leaks, or are maybe hunting through information stealer malware logs that might be dropped on like Telegram, for example, and are trying to hunt, for those, more sensitive, more interesting type of credentials that they could then leverage to be able to get access to, organizations. And so I think, first and foremost, from a, kind of CTI application perspective, having some type of compromised credential data monitoring, reliable service that is going out there, looking for compromises, maybe not only related to your organization's domains, but also to, your key third-party domains, and looking at where there might be some kind of privileged access between those third parties to your own environment, and seeing if there are credentials associated to that. That can be a very kind of key, first sort of step in terms of CTI mitigation. I'd say then where things can start to get that much more kind of advanced in your CTI approach is definitely around doing some of the more kind of adversary engagement type tracking. And so if you recall to that, go back to that slide around, tracking actor communications. the initial access broker kind of community out there is one of the key areas that we do monitor very closely. And so a big piece of what our team does is looking to have a very kind of steady sort of engagement cadence with these types of actors to get visibility into what type of unauthorized access they might have to different organizations. And so again, that does take having that sort of human operator level expertise to be able to do that type of engagement, but having that type of visibility, having your kind of third party key supplier list in place to then be able to track against that type of reporting and data collection can be a very, very powerful early warning type indicator to potentially stop attack eventually forming. I'd say with that said, then if you look at kind of credentials and initial access brokers on sort of like the early side of the attack cycle, we can then kind of then take a look at kind of ransomware digital extortion campaigns as sort of in the middle of attack or kind of post attack cycle as well. And so even though it is a bit more reactive, we do find it can still be very valuable and important to generally just track for what breaches are occurring within your industry, and then of course tracking for if and when there is any sort of ransomware event or extortion event or breach that might be related to your suppliers or your third parties. And so a big piece around that then is okay, unfortunately a breach has happened, then actually taking some steps to understand what the kind of the scope of the compromise is, the scope of information data leakage that might be occurring on some of the different dark web leak sites out there. And so having that type of monitoring in place and a steady reporting stream on that can be very valuable when, unfortunately, when certain attacks do happen. I'd say the two other areas that we certainly track very closely as well, as potential kind of early warning type indicators are in the areas of kind of malware as well as then weaponized vulnerabilities. And so in terms of kind of malware, looking very closely at any sort of campaigns that are going out that might be in the form of what we call mal spam, but essentially, typically will be stolen or kind of hijacked email threads that look very convincing, that will come into maybe a large number or maybe key employees in your organization, and again are a way to potentially get initial access within your organization. And so a key kind of solution we typically recommend is not only kind of tracking your indicators of compromise and getting C2s and key IOCs on your watch list and block lists, but also having some type of broader kind of emulation data around how this malware is operating, what commands are being issued from this malware. Again, can just allow you to have a little bit more of a proactive stance in terms of what might be coming into your organization or what might be coming into your supply chain. And so I'd say one of the big ways our botnet data is utilized for a lot of our customers is to track when there may be a broader kind of like mal spam campaign that might be going out to your organization or to your key suppliers. And so we do track for kind of the recipient emails of those types of mal spam campaigns. Might be familiar with Emotet being a big one, going back, a few years now. But there are certainly other ones that continue to this day to track closely. And then I'd say certainly the last one that I think has gotten a lot of attention in the last 12 months has been around, kind of key software vulnerabilities, and particularly kind of software supply chain type compromises overall. And so a key kind of piece of that from a CTI perspective is actually tracking the probability of different vulnerabilities being weaponized, using that to help guide your kind of patch prioritization cycles, and really kind of overall tracking for kind of broader actor chatter around what vulnerabilities might be exploited next relevant to your supply chain. Great. Well, I'd love to go ahead and dig a bit more into then how you can actually apply CTI to protecting your supply chain. So again, that side previously was a bit more of a kind of higher level of different types of threats. What solution could we apply? Let's go ahead and actually look at some kind of real world examples, and then can also dig into some kind of notable developments that we saw coming out of Titan over the last year as well. I think before we dive into that, I figured this brief discussion here would be helpful in terms of defining a little bit more clearly when we're talking about supply chain, what aspect we're looking at. And so I think we've seen kind of two different areas that have kind of sort of formed in terms of how cyber threats could impact a supply chain. And so I think this first one here, you can see on the left, these are just a few kind of example headlines from the last few months or so. But there's sort of the traditional kind of cyber intrusion impact that could happen on like a physical supply chain, right? And so in terms of like that first headline there, there was a really interesting piece that came out from the OCCRP talking about how cocaine trafficking groups were able to leverage an insider who installed a USB with malware into the main kind of port system, and then they were able to divert and control shipments that they knew were carrying cocaine from South America into Europe. So certainly something like that in terms of leveraging kind of cyber unauthorized access to then manipulate the physical supply chain in some way. And again, things like there was a pretty notable kind of large Israel-linked hacktivist attack that occurred a couple months ago that pretty much shut down 70% of Iran's gas stations. So when we're kind of talking about the physical supply chain and cyber threats, those are the sort of the type of instance we're thinking through. And then I would say the other area that has certainly got a lot of attention in the last 12 months is more around the actual cyber product type supply chain. And so these are just a couple big examples there in terms of where we've actually seen ransomware groups like Clop be able to conduct mass weaponization of a vulnerability in a key product, and then leverage that to be able to conduct very kind of broad attacks across different organizations, all using that same product. So again, a slight kind of like distinction there, and sometimes there certainly is overlap, right, where you might see, of course, something, an attack that might have happened on their cyber supply chain, then ultimately results in kind of downstream like physical impacts. But there are also kind of distinct types of threats that we do see in the cyber underground that it's helpful to kind of keep these things a little bit more separated in our discussion. But yeah, so with that, I would love to then kind of dig into a little bit more into some examples and how our customers particularly leverage Titan and kind of broader CTI approaches to address each of those domains. And so I would say, what we're looking at first and foremost here again is the importance of that Intel requirements driven approach. And so one of the kind of handy aspects of our framework is a breakout by threats impacting kind of industry as well as region. And so we certainly have kind of traditional physical supply chain type industries and sectors covered off: transportation, shipping, and manufacturing. And so within Titan in our reporting, you're able to track for set alerts around and filter down by those GIRs to get very quickly to kind of intel that is relevant to the supply chain. I'd say one of the kind of big areas of focus for a lot of our customers within especially the last kind of 4 years, of course, has been around ransomware, and particularly kind of the proliferation of sort of this ransomware attack to then kind of like data leak site sort of cycle. We've seen since 2020 actually over 120 different of these deep and dark web blogs, all the kind of different brands and whatnot that have been set up by different groups to be able to then do these types of kind of pressure, kind of extortion campaigns, naming and shaming. You'll see here on the right, that's a little screenshot just from our kind of overall collection. And so there's been over 14,000 victim posts that we've seen been published across these sites since 2020. And so again, a big a big sort of, kind of like monitoring operation from a CTI perspective can be to, sort of understand who your key partners are, your key carriers, your key suppliers, have that list handy, and, have a sort of automated tracking against when there are different, organizations listed on these sites, unfortunately, following a ransomware attack. And so, again, just having that kind of visibility, and then, having sort of a playbook in place to then, as much as possible, understand what data has been leaked, understand, your kind of relationship to that supplier, what data could potentially come out due to that event, can be a very kind of important step to take to help, mitigate an impact that occur for your supply chain. I would say then, from the more proactive side, though, then, going back to some of the things that we discussed a little bit early in the webinar, is certainly then around how can you do a little bit more kind of tracking of actor communications. How could you potentially leverage, direct engagement with adversaries from different CTI teams to get more visibility prior to an attack? So again, spoke to the importance of, being able to engage with, get visibility into what, kind of the private initial access broker community is doing. But I would say there are, something to keep in mind, there are a lot of other kind of different types of actors out there who might just, look to maybe exploit a SQL vulnerability and just dump a database and look to sell that, or different fraudsters who may have an insider a certain organization and are offering to, manipulate a supply chain in some way, do type, kind of reshipping type scam. So there's a lot of different ways that, having that capability to be able to track the actors, even engage with the actors, can, again, just help you kind of stay one step ahead of what threats might be coming to your supply chain. This is just a quick kind of sanitized example here of a type of product that we put out called a breach alert. And so can see just kind of an example of how we look to leverage our kind of GIR framework within all of our reporting. This particular targeting was pretty interesting from last August, because when we did engage the actor, it did reveal that there was quite a bit of kind of associated and privileged data to a large number of different kind of physical supply chain operators who were a part of that air cargo community. So again, just having kind of the capability, the kind of the tools to be able to kind of track that type of information can be very handy to help mitigate any sort of risks that could come from an incident like that. Great. Then just to kind of pivot to the other, what I would say, probably the domain that is been getting the most attention for the last year, is then, how actors have become more proficient in, and kind of accelerated their targeting of the cyber supply chain. So one of the big areas that we do track naturally then is, all the kind of different vulnerabilities out there, where we are seeing, actor chatter about, either weaponizing or having developed at least some type of proof of concept, or even kind of marketing, their ability to exploit a vulnerability. And so, again, having that kind of requirements-driven approach to track different aspects of that, we look at, things like exploit kit updates. And so there are actors in the cyber underground who are experts at, essentially integrating the most well-known exploits into kits that can be, very easily kind of marketized and weaponized by a large number of actors. And so again, that just kind of that ease of use then to be able to leverage an exploit can really, heighten the risk that can come from a particular vulnerability for your organization. So we track things like that. And we also track, the actual kind of original, exploit developers too in the cyber underground. And so the folks who do claim to have 0 days or 1 days that they've developed and are looking to sell off. And so again, kind of that role and importance of, having that visibility into the actor communications and even the ability to engage with those actors can be very handy. So this is just a quick kind of example snapshot of one actor we engaged who claimed to be selling a 0 day into a specific, kind of key Citrix product. And so, again, something to kind of keep in mind. This is, intel oftentimes that will come prior to kind of like a CVE being assigned, prior to like broader open source reporting around the vulnerability. These type of 0 days kind of circulating, privately, that are really important to be able to, track as much as possible. And then I think it's then worth again emphasizing, the big kind of concern, of course, around, being able to find this type of vulnerability in a specific kind of key product or software within the cyber supply chain is then the ability to weaponize that more broadly and really, proliferate attacks across the board for any organization that is using that product. So I'd say we certainly saw that play out with the CLOP ransomware as a service group and the specific MoveIt vulnerability. Just a quick snapshot of what message that they had put out in June, where they finally did kind of release that they did have this exploit, claiming that they were the only ones, with this exploit. And so, that is the kind of the big concern here to continue to watch going forward, of course, as well as, how these types of, financially motivated groups as well can really, proliferate attacks opportunistically. Again, it's just something to keep in mind, though. This is not necessarily new, and we have seen this, of course, from more of a kind of espionage angle as well. Again, I think SolarWinds is a really kind of important one again to call out. We even observed within the cyber underground some kind of overlap with initial access already being sold on one of the Russian forums from a very notorious actor. Years even prior to that visibility, that vulnerability being exploited. Then finally, so again, just kind of part of that importance of having that that visibility in the cyber underground, being able to kind of track these actors and the comms that they're putting out. Great. Then would love to kind of finish up today then with just flagging a few more kind of notable developments that we saw in 2023, and then can also speak to then the broader outlook for 2024. Again, I think we'll be covering a lot of the same ground, and I think it's important to sort of emphasize these these trends that we've been kind of seeing in a lot of different areas of the research that we've been doing. And so just wanted to share kind of quickly by the numbers in terms of what our team has tracked. We did publish over 1,200 breach alerts around, either, kind of initial access type intrusions or ransomware attacks that we had linked to kind of targeting of the physical supply chain operators in some way. And I'd say one of the more kind of notable ones that we did see was, again, a very kind of, I think a common sort of kind of playbook that we're going to see from actors going forward. So there was one ransomware group that was able to breach a systems integrator, and what was sort of novel in their approach going forward that we had not really seen as much of, in previous years, was then actually being able to, kind of go downstream and further extort another 7 of their customers across, a lot of different kind of industries and customer and countries as well. And so, again, just that, kind of that broader concern of how, getting into one key third party or one key supplier, and how that could then, actors can continue to kind of innovate to be able to do more kind of opportunistic targeting. I'd say the other, again, kind of notable trend that we've seen, going from, last year is, certainly an interest from the initial access broker community in targeting information technology companies in particular. So we probably conducted over 100 engagements in 2023 with different actors, and we track very closely all of the different offers that they provided to our sources, and then we align that to different industries. So IT companies were actually the second most targeted industry in 2023 from our monitoring. Again, another just kind of spotlight example here from one private conversation with our source. There was a broker who offered access to a cybersecurity vendor and touted his ability to target over 400 different customers. And again, it's something we kind of observed in different conversations with actors that certainly actors are realizing they can kind of monetize their initial access that much more by kind of flagging what the potential like supply chain impact or like opportunity there could be. So they'll look to kind of charge a bit more or advertise that a bit more, with that kind of understanding that, supply chain type targeting and access can be very lucrative in the underground. And then I think, kind of the biggest, clearest kind of incident from last year, certainly again around Clop and Move It. Again, I think what is sort of a concern from that development is, kind of Clop, really their sort of success in being able to normalize, doing, kind of financially motivated software supply chain compromise and showing that they could even innovate, kind of tactics on the fly to be successful in the extortion that they were doing. And so something that we did observe that was a bit more novel and was interesting was, Clop amidst as they were, doing all of the type of negotiations and extortion, type work, post-attack, kind of publication of the attacks. They went ahead and they were creating kind of dedicated ClearNet sites for each of those victims, and then also using torrents as opposed to, kind of the Tor site to be able to then leak data that much more efficiently. And so really saw that, kind of as a way to heighten the, kind of pressure on different victims to pay. But I think, other actors likely saw this as well and, saw Clop being successful in being able to conduct this type of widespread attack. And so just something to kind of keep in mind that normalization that occurred a bit more within the cyber underground. And then just to kind of finish up here today, I would, I think as we're looking at 2024 and the threat landscape outlook, it is less so looking for kind of new and novel techniques or attacks that will be coming out, but instead really just kind of an acceleration of what we saw within 2023. And so certainly, I think ransomware groups, other kind of advanced cyber actors are going to continue to pursue, software supply chain type visibility, access, and compromises. And so I think certainly that's from from an espionage perspective, but then also that much more so from kind of a financially motivated actor perspective as well. I think again, from what we saw in 2023, there continues to be sort of a favored targeting of information technology service providers in particular, and that being, a kind of lucrative, kind of vulnerable backdoor to, a lot of the kind of biggest organizations out there. And then, coupled with that, I think we need to keep in mind, again, sort of the role of social engineering and particularly how that could potentially be propelled by artificial intelligence. So this is a quick screen grab here, just showing an example of a GIR we developed recently specifically around artificial intelligence fraud. And so certainly, looking closely at where kind of deep fake kind of video development or sort of, falsified sort of like voice like programs, how those could potentially then be leveraged to conduct social engineering campaigns more successfully and then be able to get access within certain key suppliers that could then affect your organization. Great. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. We do have some time here at the end to answer a few questions, and I do see a couple did come in, so happy to address those. First one I'm seeing here on my side, someone asked if you could share any examples of how you've seen organizations kind of automate this type of CTI data, and particularly kind of integrate that into their supply chain risk management workflows. That's a good question, and really I think it's the right question in terms of it's great to have all this data, but how do you action it? How do you operationalize it within your organization, right? And so I know one of the more notable ones that I've seen from kind of automating some of this data was actually around doing some of that kind of more automated tracking of the ransomware leak sites monitoring. And so this was a pretty large company that basically would take all of our kind of reporting around those breaches and pull that into a type of kind of integration tool so then they could rapidly check, kind of their very large list of key third parties and suppliers. So, it makes sense, right? That's a lot of organizations take that approach so they can know at least, okay, is someone in my supply chain, have they been affected in some way? But where they went kind of one step further then is once they had notice of, okay, yes, someone in our supply chain, may have been breached by ransomware in some way, they would then compare, take that domain, compare with an Active Directory, and look at any sort of comms that may have occurred between their employees and that supplier or that key third party to kind of start and potentially understand, what risk exposure they might face from, data being leaked. So that was one of the more kind of novel ones that we saw that, again, can just help give you that much better sense of what risk, this could pose to your supply chain. Great. Then the other question I saw here, one person asked, do you have a sense of what types of software threat actors are likely to target next for supply chain attacks? Another really great question, and particularly because I think really in 2023 we saw CLOP really go after MFT services, managed file transfer services. So that was both Move It, of course, and also Go Anywhere. So I think, that is certainly, a type of product that I think actors are going to continue to, see if there are vulnerabilities available to kind of weaponize and exploit, just due to the success of, kind of what CLOP showed. I'd say though, it's definitely worth not forgetting, of course, Log4j and, how really that, kind of a broad vulnerability and open source type code libraries, used by a lot of different organizations, how that can really create a kind of concerning risk as well for your organization. So I would say to continue to watch closely for kind of those two areas, and I'd say probably the really kind of the area that actors will continue to to kind of look to target and exploit in general. Is going to really be any type of potential vulnerabilities and kind of key sort of cloud storage services. Because again, any way that they can get kind of privileged access and get, access to kind of sensitive data that will, especially for the ransomware groups, allow them to extort, that much more successfully. Great. Well, that's all the time we have for today. For any other questions that did come through, you can look out for responses via email to those in just the next few days. I just want to say thanks again to everybody for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your day.